So, the one bright spot in this chapter O disaster is going to be the recovery of Europe post World War II. And this is going to be one of those like phoenix coming out of the ashes type of thing. So, in the second half of the 20th century, Europe is going to recover. It's going to rebuild the industrial economies. It's going to revive democratic systems. The United States, however, is going to assume the dominant role within Western civilization and in the world at large. So the United States is going to replace Europe. And instead of the 19th century, which was the European century, now the 20th century is going to be the American century. Now, how Europe recovered is kind of a big deal. So you want to put a little star here next to capital B. One, industrial societies are very resilient. They're always going to be able to bounce back more often than not. Also, you have the major states in the United States integrating their recovering economies because they couldn't figure this out at the end of World War One, and they didn't want to intertwine themselves at the end of World War One when they see how much devastation, how much more devastation is in World War II or was in World War II, they realize that the only way that they're going to be able to recover is to cooperate within that recovery. So you're going to start to see far more cooperation in the aftermath of World War II than you did in the aftermath of World War One. You also have an extension of European civilization existing with the United States. And the United States is going to be a reservoir of resources for the entirety of the West because, and this is a little note you want to put down here next to A, and it may seem like a little bit of common sense, but put down here anyway. You want to put down because the US was relatively untouched by war, because the US was relatively untouched by war. You really only have, Pearl Harbor and Hawaii being directly impacted by the war. So, the US economy, the industrial infrastructure is not ruined or it's not damaged as it was in Europe. And, again, like I said, the United States was the only major country not physically touched by World War II. Because of this, by 1945, the United States accounted for 50% of all world production. Now, there's another big thing here that is overlooked that I want us to put down here in this area by A through D. And actually, I want you to put a star by this note because this is going to be a really, really big deal. The note I want you to put down, again, we're putting it, right here. Do you want to put, please, here, that there was better and more thorough planning after World War II, unlike after World War One, where decisions were largely made at the peace table and not before. Everything about the Versailles Treaty was rushed. They're meeting at Versailles, just outside of Paris, and as they're sitting there at the table, they're hammering everything out. In World War II, very early on, while the war is still raging, while there isn't really a clear end in sight to the war, you have the big three. You have the allies of, the United States, England, and eventually the Soviet Union, with the leadership of, at least for most of the war, FDR, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin getting together and they're making plans. Once they start to think that the war is at a turning point, they even start to plan what they want to see post-war Europe to look like. Where in Versailles, it's sort of kind of at the end of World War One, it's sort of kind of like a wing and a prayer. So in the aftermath of World War II, they have a pre-existing game plan. So they're able to iron out some wrinkles before the wrinkles actually even occur. Where World War One, it's just like, oh, that situation will kind of like, sort itself out. The United States is going to take the initiative to rebuild Europe with the Marshall Plan. This is going to be magnificently successful. It's going to require the European participants to cooperate with one another. An important note to mention, you want to put this down here next to B underneath number 4. Do you want to put down here that the USSR and Eastern Europe were eligible but refused to take aid because Stalin didn't want the West to see how damaged they were. One of the reasons why the Marshall Plan worked so well is that unlike some plans at the end of World War One, you don't have people just, or the United States, for example, just throwing money at the problem. Instead, you have people going in, experts in various fields, going into all of these places, all these countries that are damaged by World War Two, and they're looking at what needs to be fixed, what specifically needs to be done, and how much money is it going to take to fix it. So then the money that is being given is very, very focused money. It's specifically earmarked for certain things. Well, Stalin doesn't want these Western advisors to come in and to see how much World War II has rocked, especially the Soviet Union, because he's really concerned that the Western powers will end up using that against him. So with the Marshall Plan, he pretty much says, thanks, but no thanks. Ultimately, what you end up having is a huge degree of cooperation between the European countries. Like, for example, in 1951, we get the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community to, again, be able to easily sell some basic necessities of coal and steel to help with reconstruction. And 1957, we had the creation of the EEC, or the European Economic Community, also known as the Common Market. Um, you're also going to see in 1994, the transformation of the EEC into the EU. And then in 2002, 12 growing to 17 and eventually even more, members are going to adopt a common currency. Now, the big thing here with this, you want to put this, sort of kind of somewhere over on the side, and you want to put a star by this. Do you want to put that now there is an environment of cooperation, not competition, within Western Europe? Not only are we economically getting together in Western Europe, but we're also getting together politically and militarily, especially against the Soviet threat. In fact, you want to put down here next to G underneath F, you want to put here that this is the creation of NATO, NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And then add to that the USSR and Eastern Europe create the Warsaw Pact, WARSAW, and PACT is PACT, in response. Now, Japan is going to undergo a parallel recovery process. We have U.S. occupation from 1945 to 1952, and again, absolutely remarkable economic growth for 2 decades after World War II. What also is going to be unique here, and you want to put a star next to number 3, is that Japan is going to depend on the U.S. for security, since it was forbidden to maintain a military force. I mean, there will be military restrictions that obviously will be placed upon the Germans, but there's fairly strong military restrictions that are going to be placed upon Japan. So, to finish this up with Wars of Remembrance, you want to put a star here by capital C. I mean, the big thing, and this is what we're going to spend the rest of the year dealing with, is that the wars of the 20th century are going to lead to some unexpected consequences. We're going to see this with next chapter with the rise of communism, especially outside the Soviet Union. We're going to see this with the end of empire. We're also going to see this in some of the rise of some modern themes that we'll kind of finish up the year with.